My name is Charlotte Cates, and I'm a member of Al-Awda's National Board. On behalf of Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, I would like to welcome you to this event and online rally for Palestine, and thank you for joining us today. Amid these difficult circumstances and a dangerous time for Palestine, it is perhaps more important than ever to come together and rally however we can to build our movement for Palestine. And there is no occasion more important than the anniversary of the Nakba to do so. Before we begin, we would like to start the event by playing a section from the Palestinian national anthem, Motni. Next, we would like to take a moment of silence before we fill this space with our calls for justice to remember all of the Palestinians who have been martyred, their lives taken by Zionist forces, the Israeli occupation, and the Zionist colonial project. We uplift the martyrs, the wounded, the prisoners, all of those who have struggled and sacrificed and still do for the right to return and the liberation of Palestine, who have forged the path that we march today. I would like to welcome all of you by introducing Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition. Al-Awda has been active for 20 years this year, mobilizing and organizing to build the right of return movement in North America. And I must say personally that aside from the student organization where I became active in the Palestine movement during the Second Intifada, Al-Awda was the first organization that I joined in this movement and contributed considerably towards shaping my understanding and future work for Palestine. At every moment, Al-Awda has kept its compass firmly focused on the core of the Palestinian struggle, the right of return, and it has been an important part of community organizing and the broad solidarity movement in North America and globally. To quote from our bylaws, Al-Awda is a broad-based, nonpartisan, democratic, and charitable organization of grassroots activists and students committed to comprehensive public education on the rights of all Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and lands of origin, and to full restitution of all of their confiscated and destroyed property in accordance with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, international law, and the numerous United Nations resolutions upholding such rights. We have chapters in various cities and states, including New York, Los Angeles, Orange County, San Diego, San Francisco, Florida, and North Carolina. We invite you to learn more and become part of Al-Awda by participating in our actions and campaigns, joining our listserv and our chapters. The work of Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, is more critical than ever as we work to defend the right of return and plan for a future of a liberated Palestine, confronting all threats of liquidation that represent the continuing Nakba over 72 years. And as we remember 72 years of ongoing catastrophe, we also know that this is 72 years of organizing, struggle, and resistance, in which the Palestinian movement has been and remains at the center of all struggles for justice and against colonialism around the world. This event today will begin with an online rally. Al-Awda always takes to the streets on the anniversary of Al-Nakba to demand the right of return. Today, we are taking the virtual space to rally together for Palestine, and we'll be asking you to join us in taking action with a Twitter campaign and more during this event. After the online rally, we will host a discussion moderated by our Al-Awda National Board member, Khalid Hijazi. At any time, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom window, into the Facebook Live comments section, or into the Zoom chat box. We will keep an eye out for your questions, although we can't promise that all will be answered. With that being said, it is time to rally together, confronting 72 years of Nakba and marching towards return. Al-Awda is honored to welcome Amer Zahr, an Arab Palestinian American comedian, speaker, writer, academic, and adjunct professor at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. Amer will be hosting our online rally for the right of return and a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Let us welcome Amer Zahr.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me out there in the world. Thank you, Charlotte, for bringing us all together here today, and for everyone that is going to be speaking here today at the Al-Awda rally. Well, it's been 72 years, and we are still here. That is our message to everybody in the world. You know, I always say we Palestinians are serial overachievers, and we are. It all started with Jesus, and it's continuing until today. And we Palestinians are still here walking the earth and not forgetting. That's what Al-Awda is all about. That's what a lot of Palestinian movements are all about. To remind the world that we are here, we're not forgetting, and we're going to keep fighting for our rights. Nothing that the world has tried has ever stopped that drive for justice. And so we're here again today. Obviously, we're living under strange times. We wish that we could be doing this live with everybody. We wish that we could be out there in the world with everybody. But I think we're going to do something really unique today and bringing people together and making sure that we are sending this message along. You know, I'll tell a quick story about my two grandfathers. You know, if people ever listen to my comedy, they know that I have a Christian side of my family and a Muslim side of my family. My dad is Christian and my mom is Muslim, both Palestinians, both refugees. My dad's dad, whose name was Ilyas, actually was born in Nazareth, and then he went to Jaffa in the 20s, maybe early 30s, went to Jaffa, where he became a teacher, and he actually became a principal eventually in Jaffa. My grandfather fought for the British, like many Palestinians did, in World War II. He went there and he fought, and he was actually shot and then came back to Palestine when the war was over. He then married my grandmother, whose name was Selma. She was from Jaffa. They had my dad in March of 1948. And then in April of 1948, Jaffa was ethnically cleansed and they became refugees in Amman, Jordan. I can't imagine what my grandfather must have felt to fight for a country that was controlling his land only to see these colonial powers give it away and then to be ousted violently by militias simply because of his background. He ended up in Jordan, raised his family there, and it was not an easy life. He became a carpenter there. He built their house, and it's the house that they hid under during the 1970 Black September War, when thousands of Palestinians were killed by the Jordanian military. My other grandfather's name was Muhammad. Muhammad was born in Akka in the 20s, and he actually became an agricultural specialist. In the War of 1948, he had just begun his new job. He would go to villages in the north and work there, giving agricultural advice. And he was outside of Akka during the war, during the Battle of Akka in 1948. He returned right after the battle to find that his brothers and his father and his family had all fled to Lebanon. Of course, he didn't follow them. He stayed, went back to their ancestral home right there in the old city of Akka. But he was immediately declared this thing that the Israelis declared, which they still declare today, this present absentee. And he had to now rent his own house from the Israeli government. He did that. He got married. He had 4 daughters, including my mother, and then moved to California in 1965 with the hopes of coming here for 1 year to finish some studies and go back. While he was in California in 1966, the Israeli consulate contacted him and said, hey, we'd like you to, hey, Mohammed, we'd like you to go on a speaking tour and tell people in California how great the Israelis treat Palestinians. Well, he refused, and immediately his lease on his own house was canceled, and he did not return. He ended up in California for the rest of his life. These are the stories. When people ask me as a Palestinian why sometimes I'm a little upset, it's because I have 4 grandparents. They were born in Akka, Nazareth, El Khalil, and Yafa. And they're buried in California, Delaware, and Jordan. And not because they wanted to. Not because they wanted to. This is the essence of what we talk about at Al-Awda and the essence of the right of return. Continuing to tell these stories and continuing to make sure that our voices are heard. And so today we have a really, really fun lineup and an informative lineup, an energetic lineup. I'm going to ask all our speakers, pretend you're out there in front of thousands of people. I know it's easy to get reserved behind a camera, but let's all come with a lot of energy, because I know there's a lot of people out there watching us and a lot of people out there who are depending on us for real moral clarity in moments like this. Our first speaker coming up is an internationally renowned cartoonist. He has done a lot of his work about anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, and dedicated a lot of it to Palestine. He's out of Brazil, and we're honored to have with us. Please welcome our first speaker at our virtual rally today, Carlos Latuff. Hey, Carlos.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, I would like to, first of all, to say thank you for this invitation, to this opportunity to talk about Palestine, about the Nakba, 72 years of Nakba. And I would like to say thank you to Amani and Al-Awda for this invitation. And usually people who support the Palestinian cause, usually they have Palestinian roots or some kind of relation with Palestine. I mean, they have relatives or parents born in Palestine or being Muslim or whatever. In my case, my grandfather was Lebanese, but I also highlight the fact of I never met him. I didn't know him. He passed away before I could meet him. And my grandfather never told us, my family never told us about Palestine or Arab world or Islam, nothing, absolutely nothing. So I just heard about Palestine for the first time when I started to work with leftist newspapers in the 90s. That's why I decided to go to Palestine, and I spent 15 days in 1997 visiting places in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and West Bank. So my decision to support Palestinian cause was my experience seeing how Palestinians live. So my word to my audience, to people, is it's not necessary for you to support Palestine. You don't need to be Arab. You don't need to be Muslim. You don't need to be even Palestinian. The point is, if you care about human rights, if you recognize the Palestinians as human beings, and you recognize the rights of Palestinians for sovereignty, the rights for the land, you will support Palestinians. And you will support the right of return of Palestinians, because usually when we talk about the crisis of immigrants in Europe, for example, we are always talking about the situation in Libya, the situation in Syria. It's quite serious for sure. You have a big amount of immigrants, of people fleeing from the wars. But we must to remind people there is a huge number of people who fled from the ethnic cleansing in Palestine since 1948, the Nakba. So we need to recognize not only the right of Palestinians to have their land, their culture, recognize them as human beings, and recognize their rights to come back to their motherland, the right of return. And as an artist, I would like to invite more artists to join this struggle in order to support Palestinians with art, with poetry, movies, music, cartoons. We need more people to embrace the human rights in Palestine. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Carlos. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really honored to have you with us, and thanks again for your words of clarity. All right, moving on. Our next speaker is joining us from Within Our Lifetime and United for Palestine. Please welcome into the rally, Nerdeen Kiswani. Hi, Nerdeen.
Hi, Ahmed. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I know this is going to be short, but I have a lot to say, so hopefully I'll get through it and bring the energy, as you said. So hello, everyone. My name is Nerdeen Kiswani, and I'm the chair of Within Our Lifetime, United for Palestine, a Palestinian-led community organization building the struggle for Palestine in New York City. It's amazing to share space with so many people that I admire, have worked with, and I'm proud to call comrades on the 72nd year of the Nakba. It has been 72 years of an ongoing Nakba since 1948. From the Zionist brutality towards the Great Return March rallies, to the attempted theft of Al-Quds, the expansion of settlements, talks of annexation, and the imprisonment and murder of Palestinians. Just this Wednesday, Israeli forces murdered 17-year-old Zaid Fadil Qaisiyeh during a raid in Fawad refugee camp outside of Al-Khalid as he sat on the roof of his family's home. And as the racist apartheid state of Israel continues to murder Palestinians day in and day out in cold blood, the system of racist policing continues its deadly violence against Black and oppressed nationalities, Black people and oppressed nationalities across the US, with the murder of 26-year-old Brianna Taylor, a Black EMT worker in Louisville, shot dead by police officers when they broke into her apartment looking for someone else. Dealing with all of this injustice, it's amazing to see so many of us come together in a way made possible through these webinars. But as Charlotte said, it has always been a priority for us to commemorate the Nakba locally in our communities, because the Nakba unites us all as Palestinians. Marching and coming together allows us to manifest our collective rage and our struggle towards liberation. But our members and institutions are deeply impacted by COVID here in New York, and this has shifted our work drastically, and it is devastating that we are unable to organize a local commemoration this year. In light of this, we're envisioning what local community organizing looks like under these conditions, and we're eager to collaborate with and support organizations in strategizing how we can be most impactful while prioritizing people's health and safety. So I invite everyone here watching, the organizations here, to collaborate with us about how we can actually organize for Palestine in this moment as a movement, and have this quarantine be an opportunity for us to consolidate our forces and learn how to work with each other nationally and around the world, share ideas about what we can meaningfully do right now, and come out of this stronger and with more collaboration than we ever did before. Putting aside old schisms in the interest of advancing the Palestinian cause, when right now annexation is a very real possibility. In this time of crisis, we must unite our forces and struggles against the biggest threats to our collective survival and liberation: capitalism, racism, imperialism, and Zionism. While the most privileged in the US get to work from home, it's impossible for Palestinians in Gaza to socially distance as they are trapped inside the world's largest open air prison, or for incarcerated people locked in cages from Palestine to the US to socially distance or even access adequate health care. The violence of the US empire and Israeli occupation have always been unacceptable injustices in our society. And in the wake of this pandemic, we must strengthen our resolve to fight these injustices with even greater urgency. The best way to commemorate the Nakba is to come together and escalate our struggle for full decolonization of Palestine, for national liberation, and for the right of return within our lifetime. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Nerdeen. We really appreciate your time and all the work you do out there in New York. Thanks so much for being you and for joining us today. I should say quickly as well, I work with an organization. I'm the president of an organization here in Michigan called New Generation for Palestine, NGP. We encourage people to get more familiar with that organization. We are a network of Palestinian Americans bringing our people together to celebrate our culture and our narratives. Our next speaker here coming into the virtual rally is another superstar in the community. He works so hard for us in American Muslims for Palestine, and especially down on Capitol Hill. American Muslims for Palestine runs an amazing Capitol Hill Day, around 3 days, where they train young activists to speak to politicians and lobby them. They've been doing a great job of that. Unfortunately, this year, the pandemic took it out of the calendar, but we'll make sure to keep supporting them in their work. So joining us next in the virtual rally all the way from American Muslims for Palestine, please help us welcome Taher Herzallah. Hi, Taher.
Hello, Amer. It's always a pleasure to be with you in any space, so be it virtual or physical. It's a pleasure for me, honestly, to be on this amazing panel. You know, I was reflecting on this, and you know, when we talk about return, return is possible, not because Israel only now. The new studies show that occupy only 12% of historic Palestine as far as where the population lives. But also it's possible because we're still talking about it. And as long as we keep talking about it, as long as we keep pushing for it, the possibilities are endless. You know, when we talk about the Nakba, you know, 72 years ago as a catastrophe, the ongoing Nakba that today exists as very well demonstrated and asserted by Nerdeen, continues today. You know, when we talk about the extraordinary story of devastation on the Palestinian people over the past 7 decades, but it's also a story of extraordinary success, a story of extraordinary moving forward and building and perseverance despite so much of the world standing silently as we continue to be oppressed and occupied. And what I mean by that is that despite everything that's happened, despite the fact that, you know, we've lost so much of our own land, our culture and heritage is continuously being erased. Our people are being killed, are being put under siege, are putting under occupation and under apartheid. We continue to thrive as a people, despite all of this, despite the fact that our occupier is supported by the single most powerful empire in the world today. You know, we continue to resist, and we continue to exist. This is an absolute story of success, in my opinion. This shows the resilience and the power of a people who are deeply rooted in their land, and a people who refuse to submit to any colonial project or power. And this, for me, you know, is really exemplifies the power and potential of the Palestinian people in the future. You know, disagree or agree with the politics of the PLO. You know, learning the history of how they started. Just a few individuals going around the Arab world, getting support for establishing an organization that ended up becoming the most well-funded and largest non-governmental organization in the world at one point, is an extraordinary feat. You know, recognizing the fact that today Palestine is recognized by 138 countries, despite the fact that we are under occupation, is an extraordinary feat. You know, these are things that are happening around the world, showing that again and again, the Palestinian people refuse to submit and refuse to die. And so for me, this is a wonderful story, and it's a story of success as much as it is a story of our plight as a people. You know, even in diaspora, when we look at what's happening, you know, we often talk about what's happening on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza and historic Palestine. But when we talk about the diaspora, you're talking about a people who have gone to countries all over the Arab world, and not have they gone to leech off of the people or to benefit from any type of service. To the contrary, the Palestinian people, if it were not for the Nakba, as a matter of fact, and the disbursement of the Palestinian people around the Arab world would not have seen such growth and development. You know, we know this for a fact, that so many countries benefited from Palestinians coming to their countries. You know, highly skilled, highly educated people who developed education systems. My grandfather was one of those people who went to Bahrain and the UAE and helped develop the education system there. You know, other people in my family went to teach Arabic in North Africa and around the Gulf. So this is something that, you know, we have participated in the development and advancement of the entire region and the entire world. Looking at, you know, the work that's being done in the United States today, you know, and in Europe and all over the world, but particularly here in the United States, we see how amazing it is, despite the extraordinary difficulties that we deal with and the challenges that we're dealing with, the Zionist attacks, the attempts to infiltrate, the attempts to essentially wipe out any semblance of Palestinian solidarity in the United States. Despite that, we have seen a growing student movement here in the United States supporting Palestinian human rights. Despite that, we have seen a change in the trajectory of public opinion about the issue of Israel-Palestine in the United States, despite the immense amount of money and the state powers working to undermine our ability to boycott the state of Israel. You know, we continue to do so, and we continue to do so assertively and without caution. And this, for me, is another story of an extraordinary success. You know, Amer, you mentioned our Palestine Advocacy Day. Our Palestine Advocacy Day over the past 5 years, as AMP, has become America's largest Palestine advocacy initiative in Washington, D.C. This year, we were expecting close to 1,000 people to show up from 35 states. And just to show you, you know, the willingness and the power of this, you know, it's not just because we're organizing it that I'm saying this, but because of the fact that so many people are energized, so many people are willing to be involved. You know, so many of our Palestinian communities across the country are ready to engage and have been engaging for so many years in political work that is so crucial to ending the plight of the Palestinian people. You know, this is another example of how determined our people are to liberate ourselves and to return. And I think for us, we need to honestly reflect on the beautiful successes that we've had. You know, I've seen so much data and statistics about how Palestinian people per capita are among the highest in PhD earners, and you know, how some of the most influential and important individuals in different countries are doctors and engineers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this is another example of the power and potency of the Palestinian people. Wherever they go, you know, they make those countries and those places bloom with success. And I think for us, we are ready, and the time is ripe for us to go back to our country, our historic Palestine, and make it bloom with success and liberate it from the occupation and from the Zionist colonial project. And for that, I am grateful to be a part of this community and to be a part of this work, where I wake up and I sleep. You know, I think about this every day, you know, how to work to liberate our people. And I'm so blessed to be a part of an organization that gives me this opportunity, and a part of a community that continues to work with me on this on a daily basis. So thank you all.
Thanks, Taher, and thank you for doing everything that you do. And, you know, this is something that we Palestinians have to deal with, a lot of these myths all the time, right? That they came to a land without a people. Well, we know that's not true. And we had a vibrant civilization back then, and we still do now. You know, my mom tells this, she uses this saying all the time when she talks about the Israelis. She says, "Akhaduha mafrushi." which means in Arabic, they moved into a furnished apartment, basically, which is not only literally true, but figuratively true, right? Why is there an airport where they have their airport? Because we had an airport there. Why did they eat hummus and falafel? Because if Palestine was a hotel room and you opened up the minibar, hummus and falafel are in the refrigerator, all right? There was already a vibrant civilization there, and they basically stole it from us. Yet, as Taher said, we're walking the earth 72 years later, and we're very, very bad at forgetting. Very, very bad. And so it's beautiful to me when I go around to events in America, and I know we're winning because I will meet a 6-year-old Palestinian in New Jersey that will tell me the name of the village that his grandparents got kicked out 72 years ago. That means we're winning. All right, our next speaker coming here in our virtual rally is from an organization called Samidun. Please welcome into our virtual rally, Mohammed Khatib. Hi, Mohammed.
Hi, Amer. Thank you, Amer and Charlotte, Al-Awda, and all the speakers. My name is Mohammed Khatib. I am originally from Al-Mallaha, north of Palestine, in the region of occupied Safed. I was born and raised in Ain al-Hilwi camp in Lebanon, the camp of martyrs and the camp of resistance, the camp of Najil Ali, and the camp and the symbol of steadfastness. Being a refugee, being born as a refugee in a camp, knowing that our people were uprooted from our land and homes, knowing that Palestine, within our 1 kilometers as the camp Ain al-Hilwi, for our people who live in the second time of displacement, who are living today in the tents in Greek islands and in refugee camps in Europe after the second time of displacement. I have met Carlos Latuff in Skaraman gas camp in Athens. We saw what condition people live after, our people live after 72 years of Nakba, under siege in Gaza, behind the walls in West Bank, and Al-Quds, for our people in occupied 48 as well, who are resisting and steadfast for over these 72 years. For all of us, liberation and freedom is not a political issue. It's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of existence. It's a personal and collective struggle. On the 72 years of Nakba, more than 100 years of struggle for our people. Our people today need to free ourselves. We need to free our voice and to work collectively and in unity to rebuild our national liberation movement and to restart our revolution until liberation and return. Our youth should play their role to free our movement also from the defeated and sell-out leadership who brought Oslo Accord. For me and for all Palestinians, struggle and liberation is not for a state, it's not for a state and colony for bourgeoisie and for multinational companies. We are struggling for liberation and for going back to our homes and land. To our community in the United States and Europe who are living in the belly of the beast, also fighting racism and oppression in all forms. To our people in the refugee camps in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, who are living in the front line of poverty, discrimination, and racism and isolation, deprived from their basic human rights, from Lebanon to Egypt to Jordan and under all Arab regimes. I have a message as well to the Trump and his administration. And if they think by the cutting aid to PA and UNRWA and Palestinian institution, you are pushing our people to give up and to surrender, then you are not just wrong, you are ignorant and stupid. Today, the US Ambassador David Friedman lives in a colony over a stolen land in Palestine. His daughter served in the Zionist occupation army. So for us, we see no difference between the Israeli colony, the United States, Canada, Australia, and all other ugly and dirty white settler colonialist projects. We say no to US conditions. Our people will fight back by all means, as we have been doing since more than hundreds of years. Our people will not surrender, and we will continue our march until liberation and freedom and return. I would like to salute the Black Liberation Movement in the States, the indigenous movement, and we call for freedom for all political prisoners, for Mumia Abu Jamal, Holy Land 5 brothers, held in maximum security prisons. Salute for all people of color fighting and for all other oppressed communities fighting racism, imperialism, and colonialism. Salute to our resistance, to our youth in Gaza, and to our freedom fighters, to our people in Jerusalem, in West Bank, and in 48, and down to Oslo Accord, and to surrender leadership Free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you for those words and for your great work with Samidun. We appreciate everything that you do. All right, our next speaker coming up is from Answer Coalition. Please welcome into our virtual rally, Kameron Hunt. Hey, Kameron.
Hello, everybody. Marhaban and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Kameron Hurt, and I'm from the Answer Coalition, and I want to start by congratulating Al-Awda and everyone here for another successful event. We all know that our families and our friends are feeling dread and fear, but I want to open with this, that hope, courage, and organized strategy will get us through this. Have faith in yourself as our ancestors have had faith in us, and we will see a free, democratic, and restored Palestine. I'm honored to be here speaking on the 72nd anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe. Answer stands for Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. And in our organization, we point to the key connection between those two things, war and racism. Settler colonialism has always found a way to stitch the two together, whether it's the racist apartheid in Palestine or in South Africa or all across the Americas. We know that racist oppression is a type of war in itself. We also know that the American government takes one side in every single one. They take the side of the colonizers, the capitalists, and the oppressors without fail. Answer stands against the brutal genocide and occupation still being carried out by the Israeli government. Since I've joined, we've marched in solidarity with the Great March of Return. We marched to free Ahed Tamimi, and we've marched to show strength in the face of the attacks on Gaza. But we march because we know that year after year, Palestinians face their enemies with conviction and courage in hopes of a new future. In American and Western media, they like to celebrate the catastrophe, as they always do. In my college studies, students and professors like to act like the forced separation of Palestinians from their land was so long ago and it can't be fixed now. This is the same lie that they tell about the Native American peoples of this country. The same lie that they tell about why they can't give reparations to those that they have oppressed here in the United States. But this isn't an issue that's buried in the sands of time. But there are countless people forcibly exiled in 1948, in 1967, and ever since who are still alive today. Many hold their dearest possessions, the keys to their homes in Palestine. Some of their houses, particularly the ones that were in demolished villages, were even bulldozed to the ground. And many others had to expropriate, had to send over their land to the Israeli settlers who still live in them to this day. Now, as a descendant of Africa, many of my people also know what it is to be removed from our land and cast around the world. I have sympathy for all those who only had stories of Palestine to guide them and inspire them, but who can't step foot on the land that their parents or their grandparents knew well. But the further they fling us from our homelands, the stronger becomes our desire to return and build connections with our people. The better technology that they use to attack, to manipulate, to monitor, and to imprison us, the more technology we have to communicate with each other and do beautiful things like today's rally. The power of the international movement for Palestine is the fact that no matter the distance, we will never stop fighting for the right of return and a free Palestine. Across the world, we raise the flag and the name of Palestine as a symbol of courage in the face of imperialism and colonialism. We seek peace, we seek freedom, and we seek the lands and the debts owed to us as colonized and oppressed people are restored. Liberation is the key to the door of freedom. So what I have to say is stay strong, brothers, sisters, comrades, and friends. As Amer said earlier, we are still here and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. As long as Palestine stands, Answer stands with you in the struggle. Thank you.
Thanks, Kameron. And I think I said Kameron Hunt. It's Kameron Hurt. Thank you for all your work and for all your solidarity. The Answer, Kameron, we love you, man. Thank you so much. All right, moving on now. We have a couple more speakers before we head into our panel. So let me just say, if you're listening now, we have a couple more speakers in our virtual rally, and then we'll be heading on to a panel with some hard-hitting academics and thinkers. So make sure you stay tuned to this thing. We still have a little bit of a way to go. All right, our next speaker coming up now is from PYM, the Palestinian Youth Movement. Please welcome into our virtual rally, Hatem Mohtaseb. Hi, Hatem.
Hi, Amer. Thank you for organizing this event. Thanks to Al-Awda Greetings, everyone joining us today. My name is Hatem Mohtaseb. I'm the General Coordinator of the Palestinian Youth Movement, a grassroots movement based in North America, an organization of Palestinian youth seeking to reclaim the rightful place of Palestinian youth in our national liberation struggle. As many said, we have come together today to mark the 72nd year since the mass expulsion of our people from our homeland. I have to say that we commemorate the Nakba not to mourn a loss, but rather to reaffirm our pledge that we will continue to resist settler colonialism. We will continue to resist Zionism generation after generation until we see a liberated Palestine from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea. As we commemorate the Nakba, we extend our salutation to our people who remain steadfast in our homeland. Though we must endure exile, our hearts and minds are with our people struggling for a liberated Palestine. We must center those who have paid with the ultimate sacrifice, our martyrs, by the thousands. To them belongs eternal glory, and to those who continue to pay the ultimate sacrifice, our prisoners. Our martyrs and our prisoners are our North Star. They have paved the path for a liberated Palestine, and we pledge to redeem them by redeeming Palestine. Every day, Palestinians across the globe are resisting a war that is waged to erase our nation from existence. We are obligated to one another. We have a national duty to resist this war and to build a collective vision for a national liberation. This means that no matter where you find yourself as a Palestinian, whether you're in occupied Palestine, in the camps, or across the globe, you have a duty to organize, to build, and to resist Zionism. To the diaspora, to us in the diaspora, we must do more. We must hold up those of us in the diaspora who have paid the ultimate price, who now face multiple decades of a life behind bars, who now face surveillance and repression, who now face deportation, who have faced and continue to face loss of life and liberty. They are the best of us, and we must all do more, as they have done, in service of our struggle. To our youth, you are the future. You will carry the torch as generations who have come before have also done. We must show our enemy that that with every generation, our resolve for a liberated Palestine will only grow. Join us, join the struggle. You must reclaim your place in our struggle. To our comrades and friends, to our allies, we salute your dedication to justice and internationalism. To be a comrade of Palestine is to be a comrade of justice and freedom all over the world. We welcome you and we call upon you to continue resisting Zionism and imperialism and to do more. So let us remind ourselves why we're here today. We're here to reaffirm our commitment and dedication to redeeming our land. We are here to tell our enemy that we will never stop. You can destroy our homes, uproot our trees, throw us in prison, exile us from our lands, and take our lives, but you will never take away our love to our nation and our eternal promise to liberate our land. Thank you to everyone in attendance. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to all of you who continue to fight. We will see a liberated Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Hatem, and thanks for all the work you do. PYM is really an indispensable organization in our community, so use them, support them, and thank you to Hatem and PYM for everything that you guys do for us. All right, our last speaker in the virtual rally now is a national board member of Al-Awda. She's straight out of New York. You've seen her at many of our events, so please, to wrap it up, help me welcome into our virtual rally, Lamis Deek. Hi, Lamis.
Hi, Amer. Thank you, Amer, and everybody for organizing this and for your great work and for all these brilliant statements. I don't know, am I unmuted? Yes. Okay, so I'm not good with these Zoom meetings and these videos, so I ask your forgiveness in advance for my awkwardness. Somebody recently said, I was watching and listening to a few of the Nakba commemorations, and there's been so many, and that's really a great thing, right? That so many people are doing so much in what is a difficult time. And I heard somebody say that, we don't just grieve on the day that we commemorate a Nakba. We grieve and we mourn the blows and scars and wounds of Zionism on a daily basis. And that is true. What we do, I think, and what we should do on the anniversary of a Nakba is to realize two things: the heroism of our people and the nobility of our struggle, to remember that we are indeed marked and scarred by a Nakba and by Zionism, oftentimes in more ways than we understand or are aware of. But a Nakba and Zionism do not, and we must commit that they will not define us. Rather, we are defined by our response. And so on that note, I say that I am proud to be one of the longest standing members of Al-Awda. Al-Awda has survived attacks by civil groups, by private institutions, by local governments, by state governments, by international governments. Millions of dollars were spent trying to liquidate Al-Awda because our platform demanding return, the most simple and basic demand of the return of refugees, of people's rights to go home, was just too radical. But we are not defined by those attacks. We are defined by how we survived those attacks. We are defined, just like the rest of our people, by our response to those attacks. And our response was to never compromise our platform, but to demand it more loudly and insistently. Our response was not to compromise or attack or otherize the other people who then became victims, whether they were in the Masajid or in the Black liberation groups or in the Southeast Asian groups, but rather to ensure their safety before we ensured our own. Our response was to protect not just our people, but to stand on the front lines in the streets and in the courtrooms and in the prison cells, protecting all people who served justice and demanded equality and liberation. Our response was to more firmly commit ourselves to the principles of liberation and justice and to defend all of our people. And our response was not just, alhamdulillah, one of bravery, but one of practiced, meaningful, material, and productive unity. And so I ask and I hope that as we look at and try to remedy the wounds since the Nakba, but really especially in the past 40 years, and certainly since Oslo, as Muhammad has said, that we will consciously assess how we have been scarred and marked so that we can define our response and therefore define ourselves. And as always, the first place when we look to see how we are affected is to see our context. In the past couple of years, we've seen, of course, the move of the US Embassy to Jerusalem, the expanding annexation and theft, really, of Palestinian land, the closure of the PLO office in DC, the defunding and threats against UNRWA and the ICC, and the Israeli demolition recently of Palestinian COVID clinics and increased attempts to restrict access of supplies to Palestinians, along with an escalated project by Arab states, civil and state Arab projects to coordinate and align with and normalize with Israel, which aligned itself with anti-Semitic regimes and movements, combined with a global effort to increase the criminalization of not just BDS, but Palestinians in general, and the Palestinian right to even speak about their trauma and their demands, combined with what was the failure of what would have been possibly a progressive coalition that may have had the chance to restrain or at least slow down Israeli violence against Palestinians. And in response to these developments, what we've seen across the world is an increased bravery of students, an increased number of states and of societies who had historically relied on state institutions to protect them and hadn't had their own civil institutions, forming their own civil institutions to defend themselves against Zionist criminalizations. We have seen an exponential rise in the number of Western and especially Jewish youth joining anti-Zionist and Palestinian liberation solidarity groups. We have seen the shift against a very neoliberal, elitist perspective on who can access the halls of power, away from gatekeeping. And I give a shout out here to Taher Herzallah and AMP specifically, who refused to be told and refused to work within the framework that only a select few were able to access the halls of power, and opened up DC and all its offices for all of you and all of us and every aspect of Palestinian demands and Palestinian society. We saw in the West Bank and Gaza, our people, in the face of increased restrictions and defunding, took to innovating farming and medical and science techniques, which became used across the world, to increase their work towards self-reliant economic models for self-sufficiency and reintegration in a material way with the rest of the Palestinian national body. And as the ICC prepared and is preparing to investigate Israel for war crimes, we see an influx of lawyers, especially in societies where lawyers are deemed the most elite, lawyers who've never looked at Palestine, racing to stand and represent Palestinians' response. To these shifting developments, unpleasant developments, dangerous developments that threaten Palestinian life and all life, our people's response, our allies' response, and the world's response was to do better. Sorry, I just got interrupted by a message. I told you I'm bad at media. Was to do better. It was to innovate and to create and to teach and to share with the masses without condition beauty and survival, and to rally and adopt the very platform for which we were so deeply demonized and almost lost our lives and our liberties. And so the question for us becomes understanding this lesson that compromise, bravery, and unity, and advancing our demands and advancing our people's demands at all costs leads to success. What we should then be asking ourselves is, what do we do now? How do we give legs and life? Yes, we've created a global consensus for the Palestinian right to return. How do we give this life and legs? And the first step, I think, is that we maybe look inward for a moment, and I speak here only to my Palestinian people, and that we understand that our failure to have formed a united and reunited national Palestinian body is a challenge and is and remains a weakness. Now, I think it's silly for any of us to say or truly believe that our failure to do this is a result of personal division. And if I may, I think that's also an intellectually lazy response and analysis of what's really happened. And what's really happened is that we are not deconstructing how our subconscious, culturally, socially, politically, family, and otherwise, has been shaped by the various non-apparent tools of Zionism, like the outward violence. How the tools of neoliberalism and Jewization, how the tribalisms of class, the creation of new hierarchies within political classes and social classes, the competition for resources and visibility is what really underpins what we perceive to be insurmountable personal divisions. They are political. And so I hope that on this anniversary of a Nakba, we realize our power is in each other. Our power and our strength requires that we deconstruct and we see in each other past our internalization of Islamophobia, our internalization of the otherizing, our internalization of sectarianism and classism and factionalism, right? And we start naming them and understanding and finding ways to meaningfully work together to coordinate and consolidate our powerful, and we are a very powerful people. The next, I would hope that we could say, you know, again, we've reached the point of global consensus for return, and how do we give this life and legs? There have been two constants in the Palestinian struggle to return. Number one, Israeli violence, and number two, a Palestinian refusal to liquidate or compromise on that right to return. So it becomes incumbent upon us to ensure that we can allow space for Palestinians to safely do so. Now, the issue of Palestine and Palestinians and Palestinian return is one of the most widely internationally addressed issue. No issue in the UN has been addressed as much as this. There has never been, however, a mandate by any international agency, by any state government, to actually protect Palestinians from Israeli violence, whether inside Palestine or as they attempted to return. And the right to safely return to Palestine is enshrined in international law and expressly articulated in Resolution 194 and a plethora of other tenets of international and various regional covenants and laws. But if a people cannot protect themselves, they cannot survive long enough to enter or to live on or to remain. And so I propose that to give life and legs to the Palestinian right to return, we must also now escalate and center the right of Palestinians to protect and defend themselves against Israeli violence. And we must advocate and take meaningful action to ensure that Palestinians are given access to the means to protect themselves, to remain in Palestine, and to re-enter Palestine. I went off script as always. You know, to our allies, I would echo Hatem and Mohammed's call and express our gratitude. To allies who have only recently adopted fully the most basic points and tenets of Palestinian demands, I say, and thank you, of course, for joining us, and say that we count on you, not just to continue and to escalate these demands and to center and adopt the demand that Palestinians be given the means to protect themselves and that they be protected and not criminalized as they do so, but that you take more conscious guard when you are organizing and working in your communities to take heed and coordinate with your Palestinian neighbors here in the US, many of whom have sacrificed life and career and safety and liberty for many years to do the work that they do. We're with you. Ours is a vision of peace and equality in a framework of justice that not only protects us, but protects you. And we are going nowhere but inshallah back to Palestine. Thank you.
Thanks, Lamis, and thank you for concluding our virtual rally. Before we hand off to the next thing, let's everyone out there, I know there's a lot of you watching, make sure that you do a couple things. First of all, and let me make sure, I want to get ready for this next part. I want to get ready. There, do I look good? Do I look good? Yes, I want everybody out there, free Palestine. I know we're all in our living rooms and I know that we are alone. We are not together, but you can do it. Yell it out with me now. Free Palestine. Make sure that you are doing this everywhere you are. Do it. I want everyone on your street to hear you. Make sure that you're doing it not just today, but every day out there. And also, we want everybody to be using hashtags commemorating this. Hopefully, there'll be something that comes up on the screen right now. We want everybody to use this day to go ahead and post things on social media. Let people know what village or town you're from in Palestine. Use the hashtag Nakba72, hashtag #TweetMyVillage. Get these things out there so people know that we are not going to stay quiet. We are going to keep loud about these things. So I'll give everyone a chance. Look at the screen. Use hashtag #TweetMyVillage, hashtag Nakba72. Make sure that you are doing all these things from now, today, and every day, because we are winning. What we are doing is working. We see it working. So please, please make sure you keep doing this. Chant all day long. Make sure you get on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Post a picture. Trust me, I always beg people to do a little bit, just a little bit. If you mention Palestine once a day on social media, whether it's about a dish or whether it's about something political, trust me, it goes a long way. Each of you out there listening are influential in your own way. You are more influential and stronger than you actually know. You have people who listen to you. So make sure you get out there and do that stuff every day. All right, let's move on to the next part of our program here. I'm going to give it off to Khalid. Can you put Khalid up there with me? Khalid, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, Khalid, how do I look? Do these look good?
You look really, really nice.
Okay, good.
I wish I had the same ones.
Yeah, you know, this is how I know we're winning, because I bought these on Amazon. So when we can sell these on Amazon, that means we're doing pretty good. All right, our next part of the program is going to be taken over by our friend. You see him on the screen there, a national board member of Al-Awda out of North Carolina. He is going to lead a panel with amazing speakers. It's going to be a little different format that we've done so far. So now I'm happy to hand it over to our national board member from North Carolina, Khalid Hijazi. There you go, Khalid.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amer, and thanks to all of you here. Thank you for attending this important event. I am really, really amazed by these powerful speeches, and I am so delighted and honored to be moderating this second part of our event. Before I am going to just talk very, very little, so I can allow more room for our speakers. You know, as though symbolically we have May the 15th as the signifier for our Nakba, in reality, the ideological cleansing of the native Palestinians spanned the whole year of 1948. So in these days, I would say, we remember how our people were forced to abandon the land they held so dear to their heart for the first time in history. We remember the hardship and difficulty our people had to endure in their new places of refuge, living in on the margins of Arab cities in squalid conditions. Mahmoud Darwish, he wrote, actually described this in one of his poems, Madih al-Dhil al-Ali, praise of a high shadow. And just 2 lines I'll read, and first I'll read them in Arabic. He said, القمح مر في حقول الآخرين والماء مالح وعليك أن تحيا وأن تحيا وأن تعطي مقابل حبة الزيتون جلدك. So what he said in English, wheat is bitter in the fields of others, and the taste of water is salty, and you must live and continue on living, and you have to give in exchange for an olive seed, your skin. In these days also, we remember the deceptive role of the British imperialist forces in their relentless effort to facilitate the rape of Palestine to the Zionist gangs by systematically and intentionally stifling any effort from our people to stand up for their rights during the years of their mandate over Palestine. And if I just was going to quote one thing, I am from a small village called Beit Iba, 5 kilometers from Nablus. My father used to tell me that during the 30s, the late 30s, the British, if they suspect one person resisting from our village, they would enter the village and collectively punish the entire residents of the village. So what they would do, they would go into like my father's house, and they would add kerosene to the flour and the other food supplies, and therefore rendering them, basically devastating them, because at that time they didn't have, there were no grocery stores for them to go and resupply. And what it meant for them is to go after what they have kept for their animals from corn and other grains, and try to make bread out of it to feed themselves and their kids. So that's one story. So also we remember the complacent role of some of the Arab leaders and their lazy approach in dealing with what was supposed to be of high urgency. At the same time, in these days, we celebrate the lives of those of our Palestinian and the Arab world who fought with courage and with whatever little means they had to their last breath. We celebrate and salute the strength, resilience, and perseverance of our people in Palestine and exile, in their ability to withstand the continuous onslaught and the naked aggression perpetrated by the Israeli forces. We stand in solidarity with all the marginalized people in this world who continue to fight against imperialism, inequality, and settler colonialism on a daily basis. Because most of our people are refugees in and outside of Palestine, we, Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, would like to affirm our journey to continue the struggle for our right to repatriation and restitution in all of historic Palestine. We hope that this event will mark the beginning of many more activities to carry out in the coming days and months of this year. So we have 4 more brilliant speakers who will enrich us and shed more light on the Nakba and its consequences. But before I introduce our dear speakers, I have the following housekeeping and announcement items. So number 1, each speaker will speak only from 10 to 15 minutes, and please no more than 15 minutes. 2, questions and answers will follow right after the speeches have taken place. So after all the speeches, and then we will resume with questions and answers. Please do ask questions. To do so, please type them in the chat area. Mark your calendar for our next webinar, which will take place on June 21st. The topic will be about the situation of the Palestinian and Syrian Palestinian people in Lebanon. And on this note, I am proud to announce to you that Al-Awda, along with PYM, has managed to raise $50,000 in food aid to the needy Palestinian families just this past week. Please continue supporting Al-Awda by donating money, by joining our listservs, and by participating in our various activities. And here, if you see on your screen, where to support Al-Awda. Okay, so our first speaker is Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi is director and senior scholar of the Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies at the San Francisco State University. Dr. Abdulhadi is a prolific writer with over 80 articles, anthologies, and books. She is a founding editorial board member of Islamophobia Studies Journal, co-author of Mobilizing Democracy, Changing U.S. Policy in the Middle East, and co-editor of several anthologies, including Arab and American Feminism and American Quarterly's Forum on Palestine and American Studies. Dr. Rabab has been subjected to harassment, bullying, and even death threats in an attempt to silence her and Palestinian scholarship, teaching advocacy for justice in and for Palestine, part of the indivisibility of justice. But thankfully, she achieved a decisive victory when she defeated the first major Zionist lawsuit in federal court, and that she is now suing her university administration for its collusion with the Zionist agenda that aims at harassing her, so she would quit, shut down the AMED studies program, and change it to make it more acceptable of normalizing Zionism and criminalize campus activism. Please help Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi by donating to her legal campaign through Al-Awda website. We have one designated website for any of us to donate to her campaign. Can you post it, Charlotte? Can you? I guess we were supposed to. I think if we couldn't see it now, we will see it during Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi's speech. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, Al-Awda. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Masal khair, خصوصاً بفلسطين. I want to begin by first acknowledging that we are meeting in the United States, at least on indigenous stolen people's land. I want to honor the fallen everywhere for justice, for freedom, for dignity for all of us, whether it is in Palestine or around the world. I want to salute the prisoners who are continuing to be captive and everybody who's struggling for justice, for dignity, for all of us. I want to thank Al-Awda for putting this together. It's really, really important. And I'm also very excited that there have been a week of activities to mark this particular anniversary of Al-Awda. I agree that this is continuing. Nakba is continuing, and so is our resistance. But I think it's really important in the time of COVID-19 that we resist establishing facts on the ground as the Zionist movement and the powers that are trying to oppress us are trying to do. Today, I just want to give a very small slice of my ideas, of my intervention. We have 3 other colleagues, and we had already many people who have already given a lot of important interventions, so I don't want to be repeating. So for me, I wanted to talk about how do we teach Palestine, how do we teach and think about Nakba, and how do we think about resistance. And we commemorate. And why is it that we commemorate Nakba? Why do we commemorate our all what we call national occasions? We commemorate because we need to rekindle the collective memories and pass them on to new generations. We commemorate because we want to hold those culpable accountable. And it's not enough for people to repent. People need to be held accountable. We commemorate because we really need to tell a different story. One of the most battlegrounds in our struggle for justice and for Palestine and for Palestinian freedom has been the Zionist narrative that is trying to defeat us, trying to subjugate us, trying to remind us and remind the whole world that Palestine is standing alone. And that is simply not true. We do need to tell a different narrative. We need to tell a narrative of the colonized people, of the marginalized, because if we don't, that narrative will continue. It's very important that we think about and remember, how is it that they tell their narratives? One of the ways that they tell their narratives is through trying to destroy tools of knowledge. We know how books have been destroyed. Those of us who grew up under Israeli rule remember and know how the newspapers will come being chopped up. We also know how prisoners are denied the right to even be read. We know about censorship. We also know about the assassination of our leaders, whether it was during British colonialism and the hanging of many leaders. It is during for me at least, from the West Bank during Jordanian rule and the torture and the getting rid of people who are opposing, whether it is Israel and its assassination from the leaders, the intellectuals and the leaders, from Ghassan Kanafani, Wael Z'aitar, Kamal Udwan, Kamal Nassar, Abu Yusuf al-Najjar. We're talking about the Majid Abu Sharar, we're talking about Abu Jihad, Abu Ali Mustafa, Shalach, Shhade, Wadi Haddad. And we also talk about people from around the world, such as Franz Fanon, Alpiso Campos, Geronimo. There have been always assassinations of people who lead, because the mind is a very dangerous thing for oppressors. And the methods that they try to do in order to establish their narratives and undermine the narrative of resistance, the narrative of justice, the narrative of truth, is through discrediting, through smearing, through intimidating and bullying. And when all else fails, they try to disappear other tools of knowledge, whether we talk about professors, students, shutting down programs. This is not accidental, it's not isolated. Specifically in this context of the Trump executive order, specifically targeted against students and activists and campus activists supporting the question of boycott, divestment, and sanction, to using the Department of Education complaints. And we know that the United States Department of Education is led by a woman named Betty DeVos, who is one of the most right-wing wealthy people, actually, in the United States, whose brother has started the Blackwater mercenary group, and who is actually trying to privatize education and to remove any curriculum. This has been going on, for example, for other curriculum, shutting down books and silencing them in other parts of the country around Arizona. So it's not just about Palestine, but it's also trying to silence anything about Palestine. And we know that there is a very strong Zionist campaign around that. So we are presented with the question of what stories then do we tell? Do we tell the story of Palestine as a story of an isolated people who are all alone? Do we tell a story of Palestine that is an exceptional story, that we are the only people who are the only people who are struggling, who are the only people who have ever been oppressed, unique? Do we tell the story that we are part of an overall community that is struggling for justice, anti-colonialism, and for liberation? It's really important for us, it's really important for us, whether we are at university campuses or we are meeting in spaces like this or we are on the street, everywhere, to make sure that we are refusing to establish facts on the ground, and we are refusing to normalize as business as usual oppression. I wanted to share with you a few stories from the history of the oral history that we have been compiling. Some of the people passed in a few days ago over the Nakba commemoration, but some of it I wanted to speak, perhaps respond to some of the activities that have been going on. Yesterday, I think it was 2 days ago, there was a Nakba event in which Roger Waters sang "We Shall Overcome." And he sang it according to his own tunes. We shall overcome, in the history of the United States, in the history of the civil rights movement, is a nice song that people like, but it is seen sometimes as not the most radical song. However, I wanted to share with you one of the oral histories of our delegations to Palestine. In 2011, it was the Indigenous and Women of Color Feminist Delegation. And we were met by Palestinian heroic women, such as Maryam al-Shakhshir and Amal Hanbali, who, along with Rasmiya Ode, Aisha Ode, Nabulsi sisters, and many others, were imprisoned in the late 60s. Maryam al-Shakhshir came, and when we went outside An-Najah National University in 2011, she held hands with Angela Davis, with Chandra Mohanty, Beverly Gil Shiftal, Wazia Tawan, and many, many others, Gina Dent, Melissa Garcia, Primela Nadanson, Barbara Ransby, and so on. And she started singing "We Shall Overcome." She knew every single word. And people responded, they liked it, they thought that it was really nice. But it wasn't until 2016, when we were during the prisoner delegation to Palestine, that Maryam al-Shakhshir joined for long-term political prisoners from the United States at lunch. And she explained, why is it that "We Shall Overcome" was a very, very important tool, was a narrative of resistance for Palestinians? She said that when they were in prison, whenever they felt down, and whenever they felt that they were held in isolation, each one of them separated from each other, which Israeli prison authorities did in order to punish Palestinian prisoners, they started knocking on the walls, and they started like Ghassan Kanafani's Men in the Sun, knocking on the walls and singing all the revolutionary songs that they remember. "We Shall Overcome" was one of them. And so in the context of Maryam al-Shakhshir and in the context of Palestine, "We Shall Overcome" comes out as a song that is revolutionary, that is a narrative of resistance. The other story that I wanted to share with you is a story from our own struggle at San Francisco State University. And this is a story that reminds us of a very important point, that Zionism is a passing phenomenon. Like Mahmoud Darwish, you mentioned the one poem, Madih al-Dhill al-Ali, but he also made another poem about Abirun. And this is, Zionism is a passing phenomenon. Zionism is not a phenomenon that has been there forever and ever and will continue being there forever and ever. In 2015, Palestinian students at San Francisco State University sought to commemorate the Nakba. And Nakba is very, very important as an occasion for the students to commemorate. It's one of the few occasions that they always commemorate every year. They sought to construct a mock apartheid wall on campus. They went and requested the wall. They borrowed it from their colleagues at Berkeley, at University of California, Berkeley. It was according to specifications. It was plastic. It was of a particular height. They had followed all the instructions. A few days before, they were called into the Office of Student Affairs. And the Office of Student Affairs said, you cannot have the wall because there are people who are complaining about it. When we met with them, we pressed them and said, who was complaining? And they told us that it was Hillel students who were complaining. Palestinian students continued to struggle. And then they thought that they were going to be able to construct the wall that was allowing people in wheelchair to pass through, did not obstruct walking by at the university. But at 6:38 p.m., the night before the Nakba commemoration, the university dean of students called and told them, you're not going to be allowed to have the wall. On the day of Nakba, they sat on the floor. They put on the anonymous mask on their faces. And they all sat in their dignity with kafiyas on their heads, with a big banner on the Malcolm X Plaza that says Zionism is racism and Palestine will be free. And they showed their dignity. These are students who were born and raised in the United States. Some of them have never seen Palestine. Some of them don't even speak Arabic. But they were exemplifying. They were exemplifying that Zionism is a passing phenomenon. They were exemplifying what the Zionists are afraid of. Not only that the old will die and the young will forget, but that the spirit of resistance exists and the spirit of justice exists, and that people will find any ways in order for them to express themselves. It reminds me of the poem Mahmoud Darwish wrote that says, فهل تغضب? Are you angry? And Samih al-Qasim writes, and George Jackson from his prison cell rewrites in his own handwriting that everybody thinks it was George Jackson. O enemy of the sun, I will not compromise until the last pulse in my blood. I will resist, I will resist, I will resist. Are you angry? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabab. Really important tools for us Palestinians and activists and young activists to equip themselves with. Learning what narratives resonate is very, very important. And also, actually, James Baldwin once wrote that to having an individual who is able to articulate the pain and the suffering of his or her people constitutes a threat upon the system that is perpetrating the injustice. So yes, our next speaker is Dr. Hatem Bazian. Dr. Bazian is a faculty member at UC Berkeley, Near Eastern Studies, Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies, co-founder of Zaytuna College, chairman of the American Muslims for Palestine, and founding member of Students for Justice in Palestine. He is the author of 4 books, most recent, Palestine, It Is Something Colonial. His speech today will be on the colonial roots of the Nakba. Welcome, Dr. Hatem Bazian.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you. I would like to really congratulate Al-Awda for putting this event together, for bringing us at such a critical time to recenter the right of return and to recenter a Nakba. This is monumental effort, and it definitely speaks of the continued dedication to the work for Palestine. I always try to say that how we approach the Nakba and what we undertaking, I don't like to use the term commemoration. I like to say steadfastness, sumud, struggle, resistance, perseverance, and continue to live a free Palestine in our own selves to try to actualize the moment that we will all be back in Palestine to celebrate a free Palestine. So it's 72 years of continued resistance and struggle. As far as centering how I see and approach both the Palestinian Nakba and our predicament in the global south, in the southern hemisphere, that we are still living and continue to experience the legacy of colonialism, and in the post-colonial period, these are the contradictions and colonial realities that have manifested and continue to manifest in post-colonial period. Palestine in its essence is not only a Zionist project, it is a Zionist, Western, European, American, as well as, I would say, Russian project simultaneously. This irredentism, this notion that the East has been lost to the Arab and Muslim world, and that it is the rightful claim of Europe, has been part and parcel of this long durée of approaching both Palestine and the Arab and Muslim world, which motivated a variety of different initiatives. Edward Said began his work on Orientalism, pointing to the French campaign, Napoleon's campaign on Egypt and the East, which included, as part of its ideas at the time, is the call to reconstitute the Jews to Palestine. This is at a time where Europe itself has been and continue to be the reserve and the domain of intense anti-Semitism, and I would add also intense Islamophobia, both in the past and in the present. So this notion of reconstituting the Jews to Palestine comes from an ideological as well as a speculative theology relative to Western Christianity in distinction to the Eastern Christian world. So we need to make that distinction because there are a lot of problematics that people tend to engage in this. Some of the early callers for the Zionist projects were not Jews themselves, were mostly Europeans, and thinking both in colonial and speculative theological terms in order for this idea to see to itself a particular type of trajectory vis-a-vis Palestine. Great Britain, which I don't like to call it a great, and it's no longer a great, was operating and thinking through purely colonial terms when it adopted the Zionist project. It was thinking of security to its territory in Egypt, to its colonial possession, trade routes, thinking of natural barriers, as well as passageway and waterway, the Suez Canal. So that was one of their dominant ideas. At the same time that the British were engaged with Sharif Hussein of Mecca to try to also lay claim to whatever left or is to be left of the Ottoman territory. And that's where we get the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And in many parts of the Arab world today, those who cooperated, collaborated, and actually participated in World War I on the side of the British and the French are really the custodians and the current ruling elites in various parts of the Arab world, which gets you that this cooperation, collaboration with Western powers and Zionism is not only new. It's not only the past few weeks that we get notions of normalization in the Arab world, but actually had a long standing presence for anyone that want to read the literature. Definitely would recommend a whole bunch of material on it, but to understand that that was part of the idea of constituting the Jews in Palestine for a homeland under the auspices of the World Zionist Organization. So I always begin the narrative of the Nakba not in 1948, but rather in terms of actual effective Nakba begins in 1917, when the British begin to take control of Palestine. I mentioned recently that some Palestinians, and again, I don't blame them as an expression of negation, is that we show that we have a Palestinian currency. But it's the currency that is printed by the British or been minted by the British. In it, it has English, Arabic, and Hebrew. The Hebrew in there says Eretz Israel, a greater Israel. So in the British, in essence, facilitated the entry into public discourse, into the effective settler colonial project, the equality of a settler colonial group on the same footing of the Palestinian indigenous population at the time, 97% of historical Palestine. So the British still have primary responsibility and culpability in forcing on us and imposing on the Palestinians a settler colonial project that was commissioned to be the last settler colonial project to be commissioned in the 20th century, as the world post-World War I was beginning to articulate an end, theoretically, not in actuality, because it takes another 50 to 60 years before actually people struggle again to expel the military forces of colonial power, but not yet the economic or the political power. On just a side note, the French have never left their Francophone zones. Even till today, the 14 Francophone countries in Africa, they are mandated by the colonial pact with France to maintain 50 to 65% of their foreign currency deposit in the French treasury, which means that the French control their money. And if they want to access it, they actually can access it by applying for loans to actually access their money. And then the French government gives them interest on their deposits that is less than the inflation rate, which literally these 14 countries are still, till today, are uplifting the economy of France. So France is actually should be considered the underdeveloped country because it's living off and continue to siphon the resources of its ex-colonies in the Francophone zones. So in here, the British making sure to incorporate both the Balfour Declaration and empower the Zionists over the Palestinians in economic terms, putting them in an equal footing politically, giving them social space, making the connection transnationally to the world Zionist community around the world, and then facilitating military empowerment during that period. during the 1930s, we have the 1936-39 Arab Revolt, which is, again, we see the role played by the Arab governments in the surrounding area. But what is interesting is also to think that the British sent to exile many Palestinians, including many of the leadership in Palestine during that period. And for those of us who study Palestinian diaspora, we could actually point to Palestinians who actually were sent out, or as a result of the conditions have migrated out. And I think those who study the diaspora, let's say in Chile, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, some in Argentina, some parts of Africa, in Zaire, even in some small community in Nigeria. And then you go into Western Europe, United States, Canada, you could actually find families that have actually left Palestine as a result of the British facilitation of the Zionist movement being imposed upon us. So when we get to the Nakba itself, the 1948, we already have been living almost 30 years of constant dispossession, strangulation, political manipulation, as well as facilitation by the British, the Arab elite, Arab world leadership, and the Zionist movement. So it is really, one have to be awestruck by the Palestinians still till today, both in 48 and till today, have resisted such a tremendous machination. Of all intensive purposes, we should have been completely erased from the pages of history books. But what it points out that the Palestinians, because of such a long history, such a long engagement with both modes of resistance much earlier, again, one could go also to some of the early periods during the Ottoman 17th century, 18th century, but we could set that aside. It shows that the historical steadfastness, sumud, creativity, networking that exists among the Palestinians that have made it possible not only to face the Nakba, but actually to continue to resist, to overcome the structures, the colonial structures that wanted to erase the Palestinians as a society, as a community. Just understanding, the literature on colonialism, you have settler colonialism and motherland satellite colonialism. Palestine is facing a settler colonial project. Settler colonial project is constituted around genocide. And if genocide is not completely successful, then you get the transfer. And Palestinians have been subjugated to these two things. We have still a process of genocide that is ongoing, that Israel has been committing to try to erase every last vestige of Palestinians, failing, but it's still, that's one. And then transfer from 48. In terms of the 1948, 750,000, erasing 576 villages, 20 urban centers, 8 major cities. This is part of the acts of genocide that is being committed to the Palestinians to try to wipe them out. And then you have the transfer, transferring Palestinians out during the same time period, but also transferring them out in 1967 area. Now we have the whole process of silent ethnic cleansing that is taking place, whether it's building the wall to try to strangulate the Palestinian economy, trying to prevent normative type of development, mobility, and so on. This results in silent ethnic cleansing, the removal of residency permits for the Palestinians. This is part and parcel of settler colonialism. And what we have, again, giving credit to where credit is due, Israel has been very sophisticated in creating one of the most civilized settler colonial projects in its dispossession. You could compare it to the American settler colonial project. I think they feed on each other, but I think they have far outdone the settler colonial project here in the United States in relations to the systematic nature and the giving the notions of legality to it to make it possible. So this is how I try to approach the notions of how to understand Palestine as a settler colonial project. And for us to think, in we thinking about future horizons, you cannot approach Palestine unless we understand the logic of settler colonialism. And the centrality in here, the theme is Al-Awda. The centrality is that the people have to be the center concern in relation to the right of return. And then we could begin to ask the political question. Any type of political question before understanding settler colonialism and also the constituting of people in their rightful lands and homes and property becomes almost a double crime against the population, against the land. Lastly, I want to end by the following, which is I needed to remember that this notion that Palestine was a land without a people, for a people without a land, or the fact that the Zionists saying that made the desert bloom, this is an insult to the intelligence of everyone, of every person that has some basic knowledge of Palestine, one of the most fertile lands in the history. You have it from the land of milk and honey. You have the oldest olive tree sitting there in Palestine between 6,000 to 8,000 years. Again, Zionists came to, as Amer said about his family, saying it's a fully furnished, but it's fully furnished, uncultivated. Palestinians extended aid to the Irish during the Irish famine. The oranges that the Israelis use on their media and their publicity to say how they made the desert bloom, you have stolen those trees. Those orange groves don't belong to you. Those were taken from the Palestinians, using the grapes, the olives, the materials from the Dead Sea, all this to indicate that they came to a desert. Far from it. It was the land of milk and honey in history. There has almost 3,000 years of literature on Palestine predating Zionism and predating anything relative to the history of the region. And we need to actually continue to insist that the state of Israel has been built on the spoils of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, and we are coming back, and we are going back to claim every right that the Palestinians have. Palestine is free. It's a state of mind that we need to actualize. So in this 72 year of a Nakba, celebrating Palestinian sumud, resistance and struggle, we say to everyone, may Allah, God, make it possible for us to be together to celebrate this occasion in Jerusalem, and to have churches and mosques be filled and enjoying a free Palestine, which will be in the future. So thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hatem Bazian. Really, really important, your speech discussing this important myth, this Islamophobic trope that Israel uses, and for setting the record straight that it's settler colonialism and is part and parcel of the Western European discourse. Thank you, and we really appreciate your work, especially on Islamophobic studies. Thanks. So our third speaker is Diana Buttu. Diana Buttu is a human rights lawyer and activist based in Haifa. I personally very so thankful to Diana Buttu for, I've seen her many times on TV. She is an eloquent speaker, articulating wonderfully our narrative of the Palestinian issue. So please help me welcome Diana Buttu.
Thank you very much, Khalid, for the very kind introduction. Thank you to Al-Awda for inviting me, and thank you to all the wonderful speakers who have uplifted us over the course of the past weekend, at a time where I know it's very difficult for us to be commemorating this tragedy of ours, but at the same time, all of the speakers, Dr. Hatem, Dr. Rabab, and everybody who participated in the rally really has a way of not only centering us, but also making sure that we rise and that we soar. I want to focus my comments today on what is happening today in Palestine, so that we're all able to understand what it is that that we're facing, and that what we will be facing in the coming weeks, months, and potentially longer. So I am here based in Palestine, in Haifa. My warm greetings to everybody around the world, especially to those who have never been able to meet in Lebanon and elsewhere, because of the fact that Israel has deliberately tried to separate and isolate all of us. You know, at its core, what Zionism is about and what Israel is about is not just the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, but it's about our complete and total erasure. And this is something that Dr. Hatem and Rabab both mentioned. It's been carried out for close to 100 years, with everything from stealing removing us from our homes, to then claiming that that the homes were theirs, to also demolishing our homes. They've attempted to steal our food. They've attempted to steal our clothing, if you can believe it. Some of them are now saying that the hatta, the kriya, is Palestinian, that tatriz is Israeli, that tatriz is Israeli. These are kind of the myths that they perpetuate and that they have to perpetuate in order to be able to believe the lies that they have fed not only to the rest of the world, but to themselves. We have now been living through a process of Nakba denial, where people are either denying the Nakba or apologists for the Nakba, not apologizing for it, being apologists for it. And we don't see that same type of behavior would be acceptable for other people around the world. You can just imagine the outrage if people were to deny the attempt to erase other people off of the face of the earth. And yet when it comes to Palestinians, it seems to be that it has been internalized as being okay. Now, in addition to stealing the homes and languages and our food and our clothing, there has really also been an attempt to eliminate us. We here in Palestine are fighting to be able to preserve the Arabic language, because inside 48, Israel has waged a war against Arabic to try to eliminate Arabic completely. We within 48 Palestine are also trying to preserve our ability to even commemorate the Nakba, because that too has been something that has been legislated by the Israelis and attempted to be blocked. Every step of the way, all that we have faced over the course of these 72 years is an attempt to completely erase us. And even now, in the face of this pandemic, we see again that Israel's continuing this policy of trying to erase us, trying to make sure that nobody knows about us or hears about us. You know, as at a time when the world has been everybody around the world has been told that they should isolate in place, Israel has continued its policy of demolishing Palestinian homes. Just throughout this period alone, we've seen that more than 170 Palestinian homes have been demolished from the beginning of the year until the current day, making hundreds homeless. As we are being told that we should be washing our hands and being diligent about making sure that we have access to water, Israel has made sure that, particularly in the Gaza Strip, that there is no access to safe or clean water, where we see that 95% of the water there is not fit for human consumption. We see this also not just in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, where towns are routinely cut off from access to clean water, with that water instead diverted to Israeli settlements. Again, the point of it is to try to erase us, to try to pretend that we don't exist. And even during this pandemic, as the one thing that everybody keeps saying to me is stay safe. What Israel has done is that it's used the opportunity, sometimes wearing full hazmat suits, to invade Palestinian cities, invade Palestinian towns, and arrest Palestinians by the hundreds, including children. Just in this period alone, from the beginning of March until the end of April, we've seen that 24 children have been arrested, oftentimes in the middle of the night, taken and thrown in prison. The situation is so bad now that even the UN is now calling for the release of Palestinian children that are being held illegally in detention. There's right now 194 children who are being held in Israeli detention, most of them without charge, without trial. And during this time where everybody is being told that we should be self-isolating, that we should be taking care, Israel is deliberately putting them at risk. We see also during this period, again, as an attempt to try to erase us, that our prisoners have now been completely cut off from all access to the outside world. It first started with barring family visits to our political prisoners. And it is now also increased so that they don't even have access to lawyers unless they have an upcoming hearing. And of course, given that the courts are not functioning, we don't see that anybody is having any hearings. So again, we've seen that Palestinians have again been placed away and erased and tried to be hidden from the rest of the world, try to be blocked as Israel continues to demolish homes, as it continues to steal our resources, and as it continues to steal our land. Now, one thing that has emerged in all of this is that we've seen just how absurd the Israeli security system is, or the security rationale that Israel has used for all of this period. For example, there are 80,000 Palestinians Palestinians from the West Bank who are working in 48. These 80,000 Palestinians used to have to go through arduous searches and checks every day just to be able to cross, to go over and to earn a living and to be able to provide for their families. We've seen that throughout 2 decades that Palestinians have been arrested for doing something as basic as trying to provide food for their families, that they've been thrown in prison, oftentimes shot, many of them killed, just to try to do the basics of being able to provide food for their families. And yet here we are now at the time of the pandemic, that suddenly these 80,000 workers went from being security risks to now being labeled essential services. And yet, although labeled as being essential services, again, we see the way that Israel continues to treat Palestinians as though we are not of the same status, as though we are subhumans. And that has become something that is so commonplace here living in 48. Not only that, there have been attempts, as I mentioned, to try to isolate us from the rest of the world. In 48, not only is our language under threat and our identity under threat, the Nakba, the commemoration of the Nakba under threat, but attempts to criminalize even basic meetings between us and between other Palestinians around the world. Everything from going after Palestinians who post statuses on Facebook to going after them for attending meetings around the world. This is what it means to live under this Zionist system, is a constant attempt to erase you, to terrify you, and to block you from access around the world. And one of the most interesting things that we've seen throughout this period as well is that it was just happened today, a new Israeli government was sworn in today. This was a government that could have been formed a year ago. But the only difference this time, there's 2 differences. First difference is that the person that many in the West were lauding as being a different person, Benny Gantz, the former Israeli chief of staff who bragged about bombing Palestinians, who made as his ad campaign, his very first ad campaign, an image of him flattening Gaza. This man has now entered into the government, the man that was once lauded as being an alternative to Netanyahu. That's the one change. The second change, and this is the far more important, is that in their agreement that they have signed to be able to put together this government, they're labeling it an emergency government that is supposed to be focused only on the coronavirus. And yet one element of this coronavirus focus that they have is that they are putting together, there's one exception to all of the legislation on coronavirus, and that is annexation. And so just as Dr. Hatem was mentioning, that it's a question of erasure and then also transfer, we see that this person who was once very much lauded and applauded as being somebody who was very different from Netanyahu is actually very much the same. And we know that from now until July 1st, that there are plans underway for Israel to fully annex the parts of the West Bank. Now, why is it that they're doing it now? This is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Why now? And the answer is because they can. Because for decades, as we have been raising our heads and resisting, we haven't seen that we have had strong partners within the international community, being governments, I'm not talking about people, who have stood by us. Instead, they've spent a lot of time focusing on being Israel's friend, on cajoling Israel, on not wanting to push Israel. And the message that Israel has very aptly received is that it can continue to do whatever it wants. And now with President Trump in place, the time is fully ripe to be able to steal more Palestinian land without any consequence whatsoever. And this is why it is so important for us as we gather here today to not only commemorate the Nakba, but to celebrate our resistance and to recognize that our resistance must continue even in the face of all of these measures. The time is now for us to continue to make our voices heard, but to redouble our efforts and make sure that everybody around the world begins to hold Israel accountable. If we don't take this action now of pushing for Israel to be economically sanctioned, for Israel to be boycotted, for the world to divest from Israel, we don't know what the future will hold for us, but we must do it now. And if we don't, then Israel will have succeeded in its attempts to erase us. I want to end by saying something that I just came across the other day. I'm told that I have only a minute left, but I want to tell you the strength of our resistance and our resilience. We all know that for 2 years now, our brothers and sisters in Gaza have been going out virtually every week to resist the occupation, to demand the right of return, and that Israel has gunned them down in the same way that one would, be at a shooting range. They've gunned down with impunity. And we know about how everyone in Palestine and abroad has also been resisting Israel's efforts. But I want to tell you one quick little story, and then I'll wrap by saying that just before the pandemic began, I went back to my father's village, Lamb Madison, just a few kilometers away from Nazareth, a few kilometers away from my home in Haifa, and went to the land where my father owns land that has since been expropriated, land that there's a now sign on it that says that it was established in 1950 by Iranian immigrants. And in its place, the Israelis had planted some pine trees. And so much has, not only have we as individuals resisted, but the land has resisted as well. And those pine trees are now rotting away, and in its place are emerging the indigenous foliage that belongs to Lamb Madison, not the fake foliage that belongs to the Israeli town of Migdal HaEmek. And that's who we are. We are exactly like that foliage. As we say, الأرض بتكلم عربي, Thank you very much for your time, and until return.
Thank you very much, Diana. Really very, very important points. Yes, I mean, our people are undergoing a systematic process of dehumanization, de-development, like what Sarah Roy referred to it. And in the same manner how like our brothers and sisters, African Americans, were segregated in all facets, housing, education, employment. And I think your points, if we are, for us, if we are to look at them in a positive way, I think we can turn around, and each point you mentioned, we should transfer or make it as an action item for us to tackle, hopefully in the coming future. Thanks. So our fourth speaker, last but not least, is Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb. Ahlam Muhtaseb is a professor of media studies at California State University, San Bernardino. Her research interests include digital communications, social media, and diasporic communities. She has published her scholarship on digital communication and other communication subtopics, and has presented her scholarship to national and international conventions and scholarly meetings. Her most recent project is a documentary, 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, a film on the year of 1948 and its catastrophic consequences, which has originated from her field work in the Palestinian refugee camps of Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. Dr. Ahlam will talk to us about will delve deeper on the situation of the Palestinians in the camps of Lebanon. So please help me welcome Dr. Ahlam.
Thank you, Khalid. Salam, everyone. Ramadan Kareem and Mubarak. First, I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you all from the indigenous land of the Pichenga tribe or First Nation in California. I would like to thank Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, for inviting me to be part of this amazing event, especially Ms. Amani Barakat and the board. And today, I would like to report on my trip to Lebanon last summer and reflect on some observations from that trip, linking it to how we can support the sumud and perseverance of our Palestinian people who still live in the refugee camps for 70 years today. I would like to also shed light on the material conditions of the refugee camps in Lebanon in a historical context. So last June, I visited Lebanon with my son, a third generation 10-year-old who was born and raised in the US. Ahmed Zubaydi's father family are actually from the colonized village of Mujaydel in Nasra, where Diana Buttu, obviously her family are from. So that was an interesting coincidence. And actually, Diana, my father-in-law went back to visit in 2011, just as an American tourist, unfortunately. He found 39 of the original 40 olive trees still standing on his land, and that was amazing. He actually counted them by one and recollected that he was missing one of them. I had several goals for my trip, and I'm thankful for Ustaz Anis Mohsen and Ms. Sama Abu Sharar for connecting me to many wonderful organizations and individuals in Beirut and in Lebanon, actually, not only in Beirut, including the Palestinian Cultural Center in Mar el-Yas, El Jalil Youth Group, and in Arishidiyya camp, the Institute of Palestine Studies, of course. So I had several goals for my trip, and first I presented on the ontology and epistemology of conducting critical ethnographic work in the context of a Nakba at the Palestinian Oral History Conference at AUB, which was based on my field work in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. Second, I conducted several workshops and screenings, in several of the refugee camps, and also to the Institute of Palestine Studies. And third, and most importantly, I wanted to tour some of the refugee camps where I did my field work in Beirut back in 2006 and 2008, and took with me a box of the film DVDs, the documentary that Khalid just mentioned. I wanted to go back and visit my interviewees, my research co-creators or their descendants, and I wanted to take my son back to his roots via the refugee camps and their experiences. And honestly, I wish I took my son earlier. And here's the reason. So the same year, last year in March, I actually went to the women hostels in on the outskirts of Johannesburg in South Africa, which are very notorious and very cruel and terrible places. And at that time, I remember thinking, Shatila is worst, actually. And I was thinking in my head, and I thought it could never get worse, but actually it did when we revisited this this year. It was, the conditions were even more terrible. Of course, with now between 1 million and 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, many of who are sharing the camps with their Palestinians brothers and sisters, the camps are more crowded and more impoverished and destitute. Especially, as I said, the Shatila camp. I think it's probably now the worst one in Lebanon. And even, the Palestinians I met there were saying it's no longer Palestinian refugee camp because of the crowdness, people trying to flee, and all the other issues. But before I continue talking about my trip and observations, let me provide an intro about the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon to those who don't know or much, maybe, or little about this special case among all the Palestinian refugees. And I know some of the audience actually are from some of the refugee camps. Hopefully today they are welcome to chime in during the Q&A, and please feel free to share your stories, correct me if I made a mistake, anything, so we could make this session a collective sharing of information. The refugees in Lebanon went through waves and waves of discrimination, cruel violence, and marginalization from the camps uprising of 1969 against, of course, the Mukhabarat, the Lebanese Mukhabarat, and the military rule of the camps, to blaming them for the civil war in Lebanon, to blaming them for the Israeli invasion in 1982, to the camp siege from 1985 to 1987, and most recently to blaming them for the coronavirus during COVID-19 alongside their Syrian fellow refugees and other foreigners, but mainly the Palestinians and Syrian refugees. The latest episode was to prevent Palestinian refugees from going back to Lebanon. So they are allowing all Lebanese expatriates to go back, but not Palestinians. And also with camps lockdown, it is estimated now that about 90% of the working force among the refugees are unemployed currently. This is according to the Middle East Monitor. Of course, the unemployment rate among the refugees was terrible before COVID-19 at about 20 to 25%, but now it's actually at 90%. There has also been pushback against the racist policies and practices by the Lebanese government and its different institutions, and many Lebanese citizens stood in solidarity with their fellow Palestinians in facing such racism and discrimination. And the word racism, we could spend time talking about whether it's actually considered racism or not, but I will avoid that discussion now and go with what people report from the ground. Especially after the October Lebanese revolution that showed that many people, especially among the younger generations, I'm talking about Lebanese people, reject the confessional or sectarian division of the government. However, it's a long struggle, and the question is, how did it all begin, right, or start? It is estimated that about 100,000 Palestinian refugees were forced to settle in Lebanon as a result of a Nakba in 1948 and after, like few years after. According to the 2018-2019 UNRWA statistical report, the current number of registered Palestinian refugees in Lebanon is 475,000 Palestinian refugees. And if Charlotte could put this slide on the refugee camps. The number of other registered persons are about 59,000, which does not include those who are unregistered, and some are even undocumented, which are two different categories. There are about 12 official camps in Lebanon, in which about half of all registered persons live. If you could put the slide on the camps, please. You can read them for yourself, but the last one, just to give you an idea, that the Wavel camp is actually the same as Al Jalil camp, but that is the original French name of what used to be a military post for the French colonial forces, actually. one of the worst refugee camps, actually. I talked about Shatila, but also the Waval or Al-Jalil is another terrible refugee camp. Those are the official ones. Those don't include, other smaller refugee camps that are not official or, community gatherings. For example, in 2008, I worked in Ad-Daouk, I worked in Shalihat and other community gatherings. For all these refugees, there are only 27 honorable primary healthcare facilities. And actually, to link that to the coronavirus or COVID-19, our, supporters or our brothers and sisters in Lebanon had been reporting that with the cuts on UNRWA and its bankruptcy, there are zero ventilators in the refugee camps. There are no quarantine units. They are trying to, some of the community partners did makeshift, quarantine units to the best of what they could do. So if any pandemic, incidents happen there, it would be a human disaster at the biggest scale. There were zero loans given to the refugees in Lebanon in 2007, unlike Jordan, Palestine, and Syria, and that's also related to the political and legal status of the Palestinians, which we could talk about during Q&A. According to a July 2019 Al Jazeera report, Lebanon has an elaborate racist political system designed to discriminate against Palestinians. For example, as foreign workers, Palestinians should be entitled to live anywhere in Lebanon, have legal rights and full social security benefits, including healthcare, but in practice, that never happens actually. On the contrary, they are discriminated against, even like for other foreign workers have much better benefits than them. Banned from working in many professions, at least 20 organized by association, including in medicine, law, and engineering, as well as holding jobs as taxi drivers and barbers. The majority of Palestinian laborers end up taking on low-wage jobs in agriculture and construction work. Palestinians are also banned from owning property or inheriting property from their family members. In 2001, the Lebanese parliament passed the ownership law, which limits the ownership of real estate, including residential apartments, land, and commercial properties, to persons holding the nationality of a country recognized by Lebanon. That's very interesting. The law also prohibits property ownership by any individual whose legal status violates the constitutional provisions, etc. In practice, this law also abrogates the Palestinians' right to inherit property, as descendants are not able to complete the registration procedures. As a result, the states usually confiscates property that Palestinians somehow managed to gain. Following Israel's 1982 invasion and the PLO withdrawal from Lebanon, movement to and from Palestinian refugee camps, particularly those in the south, have been subjected to strict security measures. The Lebanese army maintains checkpoints at the entrances to most of the southern camps. In addition, the army strictly monitors and restricts building and renovation materials brought into the southern camps, especially in the Taher region. And actually, I had to obtain special military permit to enter Refugee camp this past summer. Also in 2018, I was not allowed to enter Nahr al-Barid after its destruction. I interviewed some of its residents who ended up in Burj al-Barajne there, couldn't go to the Nahr al-Barid. I also had to sneak to Dubai with the Belgium Red Cross, in their car basically, because of those restrictions. In early 2009, the Lebanese Parliament's Committee on Women and Children proposed a draft law to amend Article 15 of the Lebanese Nationality Law of 1925, which allows basically Lebanese women married to foreigners to grant citizenship to their kids, but this excluded Lebanese mothers married to Palestinian fathers. Unfortunately, this marginalization and exceptionalization of Palestinian refugees continue as we speak. The Lebanese government has always maintained that those discriminatory policies are meant to prevent the resettlement of the refugees and uphold the right to return to Palestine. That's what they claim, of course. But in practice, those policies only weakened our community and made many refugees flee the first chance they got. To preserve the dignity of our people and empower them through fair living conditions would only strengthen their will to go back to Palestine. In June of 2010, the Lebanese parliament addressed this issue of the refugees' rights but the draft bill was referred back to the committee. In July of 2019, Palestinians rose up after the labor minister of Lebanon, Kamil Abu Sulaiman, gave Palestinians and other foreign laborers a month to register, then started targeting Palestinian and Syrian refugees, closing down businesses, fining laborers and businesses, etc. So it was a very targeted implementation of the law. And according to an unpublished article that should appear in June, I think, in the Majalat al-Dirasat al-Falastiniya, the refugee camps have been under military emergency laws since their creation in Lebanon. The legal status of the refugees has been framed politically, socially, and emotionally within a framework of absence and exceptionalism, especially denying the refugees any involvement in making the laws that impact them directly. Of course, we didn't talk about UNRWA because I think I don't have time. I have like about 20 pages of notes. But this, conversations comes as Trump started his presidency with attacking and defunding UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee and Works Agency. It's the sole, lifeline for the refugees, especially in Lebanon. People might have thought it's one of crazy Trump's, crazy shenanigans, but actually it was a very well calculated introduction to what came after in what is called the joke of the century. That's what I like to call it. Drawing on previous agreements between the United States and Israel, the Trump plan states that the refugees will be absorbed into the Palestinian state. And this is according to Al-Arabi, a newspaper article that was published 2 days ago. The vast majority will be integrated into their host countries. In addition, 50,000 refugees will be resettled in countries belonging to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation over a 10-year period. While the plan claims that the final goal is to replace refugee status in camps as well as UNRWA with citizenship, housing units, etc., the Trump administration's hostility toward the Palestinians undermine all of that. And instead, erasing the refugees appears to be the ultimate goal here. Now, back to the current material conditions in the refugee camps. During the first few weeks of the response to the COVID-19 or coronavirus pandemic, Samir Jaja on March 13 called for tightening security measures around the Palestinian refugee camps, locking it down and preventing exit and entry of anyone to these camps. Here's the pandemic that happened across the world from the refugee camps and from Lebanon, and somehow the Palestinian refugees and also to an extent the Syrian refugees are blamed for it. It's unbelievable form of discrimination. This transformed the refugee camps into boiling concentration camps. We also saw some racist discourse emerging from its hiding places, including the racist cartoon in Jamhuriya that compared the Palestinian fighters to the corona pandemic. If you can put that cartoon on the screen, Charlotte, I would be grateful. They took it down since then, but many people around the world managed to actually screen capture it and keep it. So to conclude, I call on all diaspora organizations in Shatat all over the world, including here in the States, and especially Al-Awda, to create strong connections and alliances with the organizations of the civil society in the refugee camps in Lebanon, beyond relief work, into a more structured approach to alleviating the material conditions, including political, civil, and social rights of the refugees, by challenging the Lebanese government's racist policies or discriminatory policies beyond solidarity statements and relief work, into active participation in the campaigns that take place on the ground in those refugee camps in Lebanon. This could include establishing a coalition between diaspora organizations around the world, including those on the ground in Lebanon, that would meet and strategize on a regular basis, something like maybe monthly virtual meetings. At least we can have a constant discourse that is based on constant assessment of the situation on the ground, provided by our sister organizations in Lebanon, and comprehensive collective strategic analysis and planning. Now, we started this conversation about planning strategically at Al-Awda a few years ago, so I hope that this conversation would resume with a special focus on the refugee camps and strengthening their resilience and sumud. Al-Awda and PYM and other supporting organizations, including Samidun, have just and organizations on the ground, like in Mar Elias, we have the Palestinian Cultural Center and Markaz al-Naqab in Burj al-Barajne. They just concluded a relief campaign that was very successful, and we need to build on this success to more strategic and sustainable collective work. It is very crucial to highlight that supporting our brothers and sisters in the refugee camps in Lebanon, empowering their living conditions and asserting their dignity does not mean that we abandon the right of the return. On the contrary, it is the sure path to justice for the refugees by empowering them to continue the struggle for the full fulfillment of the return and compensation. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahlam. Really empowering. Really, you shed a great deal of information on the utterly dismal situation for the Palestinians in Lebanon. Just to give you an example, I usually watch oral history from the American University of Beirut, and there was this lady, an old lady from one of the camps who originally hails from Akka. When the interviewer asked her if she would like to go back, she told him her answer that she wishes that she had been killed in Palestine rather than having to migrate or take refuge in Lebanon and endure all of this life of hardship. So your work is very, very important, Dr. Ahlam. I myself, and we really appreciate your work. Keep going. Thank you. Okay, so now before we move into the questions and answers, for us to end on a lighter, easier note, more reflecting, I guess, we have Jamal Barakat. Jamal Barakat is a young Palestinian poet laureate, and he's here to recite 2 of his poems. So welcome, Jamal.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Al-Awda for inviting me today. I think your work is most important. And as my mother and I, Amani Barakat, talk about all the time, I think we have a lot more to do in bridging some of the generational gaps in this work, because the young are not forgetting, but we certainly can do more if you ask me. Without further ado, I'm going to read 2 poems that I've written in years past. And yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The first one is titled, "There's a Revolution Inside My Head." You see us in the pictures, in action, bloodied and stressed. It's chaos and it's reality, a matter of fact disposition that smells like tear gas and agony. It's here, in the flesh, in real time, and it comes in the middle of the night, knocks down your door, shoves your grandmother to the ground, and zip ties your baby brother's wrists as he's dragged out like trash before trash day. But in these neighborhoods, the days are never the same. Yes, there are many consequences of 72 years of occupation, but we've survived and we've adapted. We've stood our ground as best as we could, and while the digital age has finally arrived to catch a glimpse, it's already late to the party. In the 80s, we still threw rocks at tanks like prayers in prison, because what else could we possibly do behind these bars? I remember the first time I experienced rage. It poured into my heart like snake venom penetrates its prey. It permeates your being fully. And just as you quickly understand how powerless you really are against an entire system, you move into paralysis. You're stunned in an anxiety-induced state because the world does not care for people who look like you. This, of course, all happened in a place where you find religious men pushing strollers with semi-automatics around their necks like the bib on their baby. A place where playgrounds are decorated with tear gas canisters like chalk on pavement. A ghost town, they call it, and it is not without reason, and it is not without consequences. There's a revolution inside my head, and it sings songs that are true. It tells stories from all over the world, for I am not alone in this. It is the heart of accountability, and it takes no sides, for it is the only side that matters. And until that day of reckoning arrives, where the clouds of deceit subside to the glory of truth, your ledger continues to grow. Your soul continues to blacken, and your verdict digs deeper and deeper into the hellish and forsaken paths you continue to sow. The second and final poem I'm going to read is titled The Motherland. I wrote this a few years back, and Bismillah. You can uproot as many trees as you want, but the roots of my people, my heritage, and my soul shall forever cultivate my homeland. Roses of resistance shall sprout from your concrete oppression, and fruits of pride shall blossom in the midst of your evil and cold winters. The beaming rays of justice will shine down upon your shadowed reign, incinerating your unjust ways and revealing the truth for all of the world to see. And my people may return to cultivate their land with the hands the earth has so dearly yearned for, and the innocent laughter of children may ring along the melodies of the rejoicing birds singing upon the enlivened olive trees. Hear my words, fear their meaning. Thy oppressive existence shall see its final day and exist no more. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. Until return, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamal. Really inspiring, moving. I hope that your words will resonate in all of our minds and hearts and minds of the young Palestinians, so they can join us for continuing the struggle for justice. Thank you. So now we move into questions and answers. If you have any questions, please write it in the chat area. I see one question that I am going to read, and let's see. Okay, so this question from Sahil Kaid, it doesn't say to whom this question is directed, but I guess anyone can answer. It says, what do you say to people who say, why did 700,000 people flee Palestine in 1948? Why didn't they stay and fight? So anyone likes to answer this question?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually, all right. Actually, it is not true that people just up and left. All sorts of accounts now, accounts by Palestinians at the time, which the rest of the world did not really believe until a group called New Israeli Historians came about after Israel declassified the records in Britain. So then it was actually very clear that Palestinians did not just up and leave. What happened is that some Palestinians were driven at gunpoint. Some Palestinians, when Israel committed the Deir Yassin massacre, they paraded. What happened to Palestinians scared them off. They went and threatened the Zionist militias, the Haganah and the Stern Lehi. Some were quote unquote official. Haganah became the Israeli army, and the others one quote unquote were unofficial, which is also quite problematic historically. So people did not just pick up and leave. Actually, we have so many narratives, and this is why it's really important to think about the oral history of Palestinians leaving the food on the stoves, actually leaving the food on the stove, just locking the house and taking the key. This is why the key becomes very important, locking the key and leaving, and thinking that they're going to come back. Also, many Palestinians after the actual date of the Nakba, let's say, I mean, to distinguish the overall Nakba as a concept and May 15th, 1948 as a date. Many Palestinians went, and there was the porous borders between, let's say, Palestine and Lebanon, Jordan, and so on. They went back. They tried to go back again and again and again. Many Palestinians fought. The stories do not even include many Palestinians who actually fought and got arrested and were imprisoned. And there is a lot of oral histories that are there. And I think it's really, really important for us to actually bring these oral histories and share them with everybody in order for us to defy, not only use the writings by Israeli writers and so on, which is, thank you very much for doing this. It's really, really important. But this is something that Palestinians, the indigenous people of Palestine, have spoken about many, many times. And a lot of the times these stories don't come out. And it's really our job. This is really part of contesting the narrative to say this is simply not true. People did not just up and leave. People said, and then people who stayed also were placed, as Diana will say, 150,000 Palestinians were placed under military curfew until 1966.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdulhadi. I guess let me go ahead and ask another question, and maybe we can have an opportunity from another person to answer. So this is from George Abu Hamad. It says, he asks, what are we doing to counter the Zionist attempts to criminalize the freedom lovers protest to achieve our individual and collective natural rights?
I can talk maybe very briefly about that, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Oh, so I guess I start.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, you know, a lot of work is happening behind the scenes in the legal world, and I think that a lot of this will become publicly launched and announced in the coming weeks to take more direct legislative and legal measures to decriminalize this. Aside from this, there have been long-standing groups and individual efforts in the US, throughout Europe, throughout the world, specifically dedicated to protecting and decriminalizing attempts to criminalize. Today was really actually an important day because on this day, you know, we've been working on the campaign of Ubay Aboudi, who's a dear friend of mine and who was involved with Scientists for Palestine, and he's a US citizen Palestinian who was detained and arrested. And Ubay, ironically, right before he was abducted by the Israeli army, was himself coordinating with me to kind of launch a strategy around this issue. Today, Scientists for Palestine, along with the past, I think, couple of weeks now of activity, have been really centralizing and normalizing. And today, Scientists for Palestine launched a petition specifically calling for the end of the designation of Palestinian acts and Palestinian self-defense and normal Palestinian activity as terrorist by the US government. This is really a tremendous step, and it was signed by Noam Chomsky and Nobel laureate George Smith, and is launched, you know, to really push the academic and science fields, which we believe will create more space to destigmatize and de-designate Palestinians who are engaging in normal acts that have been designated as criminal or as terrorist by Israel and adopted by the US and the UK. So we have a long way to go, and we hope that this is another step toward that. Khalid, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lamis. And thank you for bringing the issue of Ubay. I think all of us need to really stand behind him and support him. Really important at this time. Any other person likes to answer
Yes.
this question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Abdulhadi. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is something that sorry, you're hearing me but not seeing me. This is something that we're facing, and I think also probably, you know, Hatem can speak to that as well, and Ahlam, because
can't hear you very well.
We've been targeted in the academy. So what we are doing, I mean, I think the case, people know the history of the smearing, the bullying, the death threats, all of the stuff that has happened with us at San Francisco State. Recently now, what the university is trying to do and being backed by the Zionists under the guise of creating facts on the ground, responding to Corona and so on, is basically cancel. They canceled 2 courses that are Palestine specific, the Palestinian mural and the comparative border studies, Palestine and Mexico. They are trying to basically silence any possibilities, claiming that they are coming up with new rules and so on. And what we really need to do, I'm talking about all of us in the academy and elsewhere, to confront that. The Zionists, what they are trying to do, they're trying to do the whole Department of Education and the Trump executive order in order to threaten universities that if you do anything and if you allow scholars to continue researching about Palestine, if you allow students to continue being active and so on, like Tufts University, like Columbia University and so on, we're going to punish you, and we're going to take away the federal money that you are getting from the government. So they are actually trying to build more and more. 3 weeks ago, they had a Campus Watch webinar about this. And I think it's really, really important for us not to allow that to happen and to continue speaking. But also, in order for us to continue doing that, we also do need to come together and actually support and make sure that none of us is being silenced. So whether it is in the schools, the same thing is happening with California public schools, that they're trying to shut down the curriculum that includes stuff about Palestine. And this is a very, very big Zionist campaign. And the fact that we have the whole response to COVID-19 is enabling them to kind of like hide some of the things, go behind behind public eye and do it secretly and so on, and say, we cannot have meetings, we cannot do this and so on. So we really need to be very conscious and very alert and very aware of that.
I could
Thank you very
maybe
much. Yeah, go ahead, Dr.
I think what we need to be at least cognizant of, 1 second, that we're dealing with almost a 30-year history in terms, if not more, on college campuses and in Palestine work. And Israel have already lost the political high ground in terms of being able to have its narrative uncontested. And as such, they have moved into trying to constitute legal walls and also target the activists, the faculty, the students, those in civil society, in order to reconstitute their own paradigm again. So on the one hand, what we need is that we should be recognizing that it's as a result of success that we're seeing the intensification of this campaign, but this should not get us to be, in essence, lazy or silent. We need to double and triple our effort. And I think what we need is a number of things that people need to think about. One is that a structure of support that is systematic to be present in there. And I know that a number of organizations are doing the work, but I think what we need is to elevate it into a higher level for the support and protection, which requires both systematic political campaign, but also financial resources in the sense of endowments that are set that would support the type of targeting that takes place, whether it's for Rabab, whether Ahlam, whether myself, and so on. So far, our mobilization is individually based rather than structurally based. So that for me is a very important. Second is that I think what we need is to set up in some type of a place of a rapid response team. And I know we have a number of us activists that are linked, but I think what we need is a strategic response team, that it does not end up that the person who's being targeted is actually having to do all the legwork. And I know I speak of Rabab, myself, or others, that you end up both fighting the ground battle as well as being the person that is engaged at all the different strategic, and that becomes an untenable way for us to engage. So what we need is to really think of these structural elements as a rapid response team that has the various pieces, somebody that is going to be dealing with the media, somebody who's going to deal with the legal, somebody deal with the tech and the technology mobilization and so on, and somebody from the legal arm and so on. So that is the type of work that is needed. And then the last, I would say, for those who have some access to massive networks, is that we need to begin to actually demand and get these academic programs across the country, rather than fighting the 2 or 3 programs at San Francisco State, at Brown, or at Columbia. We need our activists to mobilize for constituting a Palestine studies programs in all the colleges as a buildup on our work, as well as we're fighting here in California in the ethnic studies curriculum. So these are just some ideas that I'm putting on the table, but we need systematic, structural, and long-term approaches to do this. And I think our unified front is a very, very critical piece moving forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bazian. And on this, I think this is a good time for us to stop. It has been 2 hours and 45 minutes, quite inundating, I think, for some people. And but I wanted to thank all of our speakers. You have been truly enlightening, inspiring to all of us, and myself and Al-Awda and all of us really appreciate your time and effort into this. And also I want to thank all of our fellow viewers who have attended us on Zoom and on Facebook. I really appreciate your time, and stay tuned for more webinars related to Palestine. And also stay tuned. You will receive an email from us, follow up on all the action items and points mentioned here. On a closing note, and this is what I wanted to say. So in these days that we remember Al-Awda, I want to send a message to the ones who have been perpetrating injustices upon us and our people. I say that from the gates and ghettos of Palestine, from the refugee camps of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, from the Palestinian people in exile and dispersion, we would like to send a message to the Zionists, to the Israeli soldiers and their leaders, that we, the Palestinian people, will not relent. We will not cower. We will not give in. And you will not break our will. We will continue on the struggle for us to be repatriated, restituted to all of Palestine. Long live Palestine. Long live the struggle. Thank you.